why you feel lost, and how to finally find yourself again. Have you ever looked around your life and thought, how did I even get here? You followed the rules. You did what was expected. You tried to be what others needed you to be. But somewhere along the way, you stopped hearing your own voice. And now, all that remains is a quiet ache, a foggy confusion, a subtle but constant feeling of being lost. Not in the world, but in yourself. And here's the truth most people won't say out loud. You're not lost because you failed. You're lost because you've abandoned yourself trying to belong. You disconnected from what you feel to meet expectations. You silenced your instincts to avoid judgment. You became so busy surviving, performing, adapting, that your own truth became background noise. And now, that quiet voice inside is barely a whisper. But it's still there, waiting to be heard again. The Stoics believed that peace isn't found in controlling life, but in living in alignment with your nature. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And right now, if your soul feels heavy or colorless, it's probably because your thoughts have been shaped by noise that isn't even yours. This video is not a guide to find answers in the world. It's an invitation to find your way back to yourself. Through 10 powerful Stoic reflections, you'll rediscover how to listen to your inner compass, how to choose yourself again, and how to walk, slowly, honestly, toward the version of you that's been waiting all along. Because the truth is, you're not as lost as you think. You've just been listening to everyone, except yourself. Part 1. The illusion of being fine. How many times have you said, "I'm fine," while feeling like you're falling apart inside? It's almost automatic. Someone asks how you're doing, and before you can even think, you answer with a smile. "I'm okay." But if you were truly honest, what would you say? Would you say you feel confused, disconnected, unsure of what you're doing or why you're doing it? Would you say you've been living on autopilot, reacting to life instead of creating it? Feeling lost doesn't always come as a breakdown. Sometimes it shows up as quiet detachment. You keep functioning. You meet deadlines. You do what needs to be done. But deep inside, you feel like you're drifting, like your life is happening without your full presence. And the most dangerous part is that the world will reward you for it. You'll get praise for being so strong, for being so capable, even when you're completely disconnected from yourself. The Stoics taught that this disconnect is one of the greatest dangers to the soul. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." In other words, the path back to yourself might make you seem odd to others. It might mean stepping away from what's familiar. It might mean saying no more often. It might mean disappointing people who benefit from your silence. But isn't it more dangerous to disappoint yourself? You don't need to collapse to realize something's off. The very fact that you feel disconnected is a signal worth listening to. And the longer you ignore that feeling, the louder it becomes. Not in words, but in burnout, in anxiety, in waking up with no excitement, in constantly needing distractions to avoid being alone with your thoughts. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others, unless you are doing so with a view to some mutual benefit." So ask yourself, how much of your life has been lived trying to meet expectations that weren't yours to begin with? You are not broken. You're not lazy. You're not lost beyond repair. You're simply overdue for a reconnection. And that journey begins the moment you stop lying to yourself about being fine. Part 2. The voice you've been ignoring. There's a voice inside you that has been whispering for a long time. It shows up when you're about to say yes, but feel that deep inner no. It rises when you push through exhaustion, but feel your body begging for rest. It pulses in moments of silence, reminding you that something about the life you're living doesn't feel entirely yours. But over the years, you've learned to tune it out. You've learned to be realistic, to be productive, to be grateful for what you have, even if it's slowly draining the joy from your soul. You traded your inner truth for external validation. You started trusting people's expectations more than your own instincts, and now you feel lost. Not because you can't find your way, but because you've stopped listening to the one voice that could actually guide you. Yours. The Stoics didn't preach blind obedience to tradition or society. On the contrary, they encouraged a life of constant self-inquiry. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And in this context, adversity isn't just external. It can be the internal battle between who you've become and who you know, deep down, you were meant to be. That tension you feel? That's not confusion. It's clarity trying to break through. It's the part of you that's tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of being what others need, while your own needs remain buried. Reconnection doesn't begin with answers. It begins with permission. Permission to question your current path. Permission to pause and feel. Permission to admit that maybe, just maybe, you're not okay with the life you've built. And it's okay to feel that. In fact, it's more than okay. It's human. You don't have to burn everything down to start listening again. Sometimes it's as simple as sitting in silence and asking, "What part of me have I abandoned?" You may not hear an answer right away, but the act of asking is already a signal to your soul that you're ready. Ready to stop ignoring yourself. Ready to rebuild the trust you lost with your inner voice. Ready to come home. Part 3. When you live for others, you lose yourself. There's a subtle kind of emptiness that comes not from doing nothing, but from doing everything for everyone except yourself. You wake up, and from the very first moment your energy is being spent on tasks, obligations, expectations, responding to messages, showing up on time, being reliable, being kind, being productive, being agreeable, all the roles you've learned to perform so well. And yet, despite all this effort, you go to bed feeling like you were never really present, like you spent the entire day living someone else's life. This is one of the most painful truths. You can be everything for everyone and still feel like nothing to yourself. And it's not because you don't care. In fact, it's because you care so much that you've made a habit out of self-abandonment. You've equated being loved with being useful. You've confused being accepted with being agreeable. You've learned to apologize for your needs, your space, your time. And over time, that erodes something essential: your identity. The Stoics warned us about this dilution of the self. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "People who labor all their lives but have no purpose to direct every thought and impulse toward are wasting their time, even when hard at work." You can be busy and still be lost. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible. Because the point of life isn't just activity, it's alignment. And alignment only happens when what you do matches who you are. But when was the last time you asked yourself, who am I when no one's watching? Who am I when I'm not performing, producing, pleasing? Most people never stop long enough to ask that, because stopping is uncomfortable. Silence is uncomfortable. Being with yourself is uncomfortable, especially when you've spent years neglecting your own voice. But discomfort is not your enemy. It's your doorway. It's the signal that something needs your attention. That beneath the noise, there's a person waiting to be seen, not for what they do, but for who they truly are. You don't owe the world a performance. You owe yourself a reconnection. Because the more you live for others, the further you drift from yourself. And the further you drift from yourself, the harder it becomes to feel whole, no matter how much you achieve or how many people surround you. Part 4. When did you stop trusting yourself? At some point, maybe so subtly you didn't even notice, you stopped believing that your inner voice mattered. Maybe it was when you were told you were being too sensitive, or when someone rolled their eyes after you shared your dreams. Maybe it was when you made a decision from your heart and it backfired, or when being authentic led to rejection, and from that pain, you drew a quiet but lasting conclusion. I can't trust myself. So instead, you began outsourcing your decisions. You looked around before looking within. You asked for advice before consulting your own intuition. You waited for signs, validation, approval. And the more you deferred to others, the more disconnected you became from your own compass. The Stoics would see this not as a weakness, but as a crisis of misalignment. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And how can you be the master of yourself if your choices are constantly shaped by fear, people-pleasing, or the need for certainty? Trusting yourself doesn't mean you'll always get it right. It means you're willing to take ownership, even when the outcome is uncertain. It means you'd rather be wrong on your own terms than be right according to someone else's script. But self-trust, like any relationship, needs to be rebuilt slowly. You don't go from doubt to certainty overnight. You go from doubt to curiosity, from fear to honesty. You begin by noticing all the small ways you dismiss your needs. You begin by asking, what do I actually want here? You begin by honoring those quiet nudges, the urge to rest, to say no, to change direction, even if it disappoints someone else. Because here's the truth most people won't admit. There is no version of your life that will make everyone happy. There will always be someone who misunderstands your choices. So why not at least choose what's true for you? When you betray yourself to keep the peace, you may avoid external conflict, but you create internal war. And that war, that's where the feeling of being lost is born. The good news is, it's never too late to return to yourself. To pause and say, I may not have all the answers, but I'm ready to listen again. Because that listening, that quiet reconnection, is how self-trust begins. Part 5. Clarity begins. Where performance ends. One of the greatest obstacles to inner clarity is the endless performance of who we think we should be. You wake up already playing a role, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who has it all together. You act like everything's fine because people expect it. You smile to avoid questions. You stay busy so you won't have to feel. And the more you perform, the more disconnected you become from your real self, the one who's quietly suffocating beneath the mask. The truth is, most people are so afraid of being misunderstood or judged that they build their entire identity around avoidance, avoiding discomfort, avoiding rejection, avoiding vulnerability. But in doing so, they also avoid truth. And without truth, you will always feel lost, because your life becomes a reflection of who you pretend to be, not who you truly are. The Stoics taught us to confront life as it is, not as we wish it to be. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity." And what if the greatest adversity you face isn't external, but internal? What if the discomfort of taking the mask off is exactly what you need to feel whole again? You don't have to expose your entire soul to the world, but you owe yourself honesty. You owe yourself the courage to say, I'm tired of pretending. I want to feel something real again. Because clarity, the deep, grounding kind, doesn't come from overthinking or overplanning. It comes from stillness, from choosing to sit with yourself without needing to fix, explain, or perform. It comes from letting go of the image and returning to the essence. That essence doesn't need to impress. It doesn't need to be liked. It only needs to be heard. The irony is that the more you try to become who the world wants you to be, the more invisible you feel. But when you stop performing and start listening, really listening, something shifts. You begin to notice which choices feel aligned and which feel like self-betrayal. You begin to feel when your yes is genuine and when it's rooted in fear. You begin to move through life, not as a character in someone else's script, but as the author of your own. And that's when the fog begins to clear. Not because life gets easier, but because you finally stop lying to yourself. Part 6. The pain of becoming who you're not. It's one thing to feel lost. It's another to wake up and realize you've spent years becoming someone you never truly wanted to be. And it didn't happen all at once. You didn't set out to betray yourself. You just wanted to belong, to be accepted, to avoid conflict, to feel safe. So you said yes when you meant no. You stayed when you wanted to leave. You laughed at things that hurt you. You wore smiles that weren't yours. And every time you did, you took a small step away from yourself, until one day, you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize who was staring back. This is the kind of grief that few people talk about, the grief of self-abandonment, of realizing that the life you've built is rooted in survival, not truth, of feeling like a stranger in your own story. The Stoics were radical in their call for self-awareness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." But that strictness wasn't about punishment. It was about honesty, about refusing to live a lie, about not tolerating the slow erosion of your soul in the name of appearances. Because there's a cost to pretending. There's a weight to carrying a version of yourself that isn't real. And the longer you carry it, the heavier it becomes, until eventually you collapse under the pressure of your own inauthenticity. But here's the thing. The pain you feel right now isn't weakness. It's evidence that something inside you still remembers who you really are. That part of you is still alive, still watching, still waiting. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just need to stop running, stop numbing, stop hiding behind who you think you're supposed to be. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, sit with the question, what would it look like to be fully me? It's not a question that demands a perfect answer. It's a question that invites a journey, and that journey begins not with a leap, but with a turn, a quiet, deliberate turn away from the roles you've outgrown, and back toward the self you left behind. Part 7. The noise that drowns your inner compass. We live in a world that celebrates noise. The louder, the better. The faster, the more successful. The more you do, the more you're worth. Productivity is praised, busyness is glamorized, and silence is mistaken for laziness or even failure. But here's the irony. The more noise you allow in, the harder it is to hear yourself. Because in the chaos of constant comparison, overconsumption, and external validation, your inner compass becomes blurry. You start chasing goals that aren't yours. You pursue things just because others are doing them. You measure your life against timelines you never agreed to. And soon, you realize you're exhausted, not from doing too little, but from doing too much of what doesn't align with you. The Stoics warned about this. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And in today's world, one of the greatest forms of waste is attention. We scatter our focus across notifications, opinions, trends, and in doing so, we abandon our own clarity. You can't find yourself while drowning in noise. You can't feel direction while constantly distracting yourself. And you definitely can't hear your truth when you're addicted to everyone else's. The solution isn't to move to a cabin in the woods or throw away your phone. It's to become deliberate, to carve out sacred space for stillness, to pause long enough to hear the quiet signal beneath all the static. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat in silence? Not to meditate, not to be productive, but just to listen. Not to solve anything, not to fix, just to meet yourself again. In that silence, you may hear discomfort, regret, loneliness, grief. But beneath that, if you stay long enough, you'll also find clarity. Because clarity doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't rush. It waits. Your inner compass has not been broken. It has simply been muted by years of external volume. But it's still there. And the moment you choose stillness, the moment you turn down the world's volume, that compass will begin to stir again. And this time, when it points in a direction, you'll have the presence to follow it. Part 8. You can't heal while pretending you're not hurt. One of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves is this: I'm over it. You say it to move on faster. You say it to avoid seeming weak. You say it because you think that if you ignore the wound long enough, it will heal itself. But the truth is, nothing heals without acknowledgement. And pretending you're fine is not strength. It's self-abandonment in disguise. We live in a culture that praises emotional numbness. You're applauded for staying positive, even when your heart is broken. You're encouraged to move on before you've even had a chance to fully process what happened. The message is clear. Emotions are inconvenient. Vulnerability is uncomfortable. Pain is something to escape, not explore. But the Stoics never told us to suppress what we feel. They told us to understand it, to observe it without being ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That doesn't mean your pain isn't real. It means you are not powerless in how you respond to it. But how can you respond to something you won't even admit is there? You cannot find your way back to yourself if you keep bypassing the parts of you that are wounded. You cannot feel whole while rejecting the pieces that still hurt. Healing requires presence. It requires honesty. It requires you to sit with the ache, not to dramatize it, but to understand it, to hold it with compassion rather than shame. You don't need to perform strength. You don't need to justify your healing to anyone. You just need to feel what you've been avoiding, slowly, safely, and truthfully. Because every time you suppress an emotion, you bury a part of yourself. And the more you bury, the more lost you become. But when you begin to feel, really feel, you start recovering the parts of you that got left behind in the rush to appear okay. You don't heal by pretending the pain isn't there. You heal by giving yourself the permission to feel and the patience to process. And when you do, something powerful happens. You stop surviving your life and start living it again. Part 9. You don't have to know the destination to take the first step. When you feel lost, the most paralyzing belief is that you must figure everything out before you move. That before taking a single step, you need the full map. The guarantees, the certainty, the perfect plan. But life doesn't work like that. And deep down, you already know that. You didn't get here because you had a map. You got here by moving, sometimes in the wrong direction, sometimes blindly, sometimes with nothing but hope. And now that you're at a crossroads, what's holding you back isn't a lack of clarity. It's fear. Fear of choosing wrong. Fear of wasting time. Fear of regret. But here's the Stoic reminder you need. Inaction is also a choice. And often, it's the most dangerous one. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Notice the order. You begin with intention, not certainty. You don't need all the answers. You only need enough courage to ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to become? Because that one question can illuminate the next step, and that step can lead to the next. And before you know it, you're no longer lost. You're in motion. Progress isn't always visible. Growth isn't always measurable. And the path rarely makes sense while you're walking it. But that doesn't mean you're not moving in the right direction. Sometimes, clarity only comes after commitment. Sometimes the road only reveals itself after you start walking. And sometimes, you need to trust the process, not because it's easy, but because staying stuck costs more than the risk of change. So ask yourself, what would it look like to take one honest step today? Not a leap, not a full transformation, just one act of alignment, one decision that honors your inner voice instead of silencing it. That's how the journey back to yourself begins. Not with a plan, not with perfection, but with presence and the willingness to begin without knowing exactly where it will lead. Because the truth is, the destination you're looking for might not even exist yet. You might be the one creating it, step by step, moment by moment, by finally choosing to move. Part 10. Returning to yourself is the real destination. You've been searching for answers, for a breakthrough, for a moment of clarity so strong it silences the noise and tells you what to do next. But maybe the answer you're seeking isn't a place, a plan, or a person. Maybe it's you, not the version of you that's been pleasing everyone, not the one that's been performing strength while quietly breaking, not the one shaped by fear, expectation, or past wounds, but the real you, the one that still exists beneath it all, waiting patiently to be seen. The Stoics weren't obsessed with outcomes. They were devoted to integrity, to becoming the kind of person who lives in alignment, regardless of what life throws at them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." And that's the invitation. To stop running outward, to stop looking for yourself in people, in applause, in accomplishments, and instead, to look inward, to dig, gently, honestly, patiently, until you find the foundation again. Because no amount of external success can compensate for internal disconnection. And no amount of validation can replace the peace that comes from self-trust. This journey you're on, it's not about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to who you've always been, underneath the noise, the roles, the expectations. It's about remembering that clarity doesn't arrive all at once like a lightning bolt. It emerges slowly, like morning light through fog. And every small act of self-honesty clears the path just a little more. You don't have to have all the answers today. You just have to listen and choose not to abandon yourself again. And maybe that's the real shift. Realizing that you're not lost. You've just been out of alignment with your truth. And the moment you start listening is the moment everything begins to change. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And if you're on a journey back to yourself, you're not alone. This space is for you. Tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep building the architecture of your inner clarity. New videos every week, and the next one might be exactly what your soul's been waiting for.